So let's talk about eyes. Um, Eyes are a funny one. I said in the mouth video that the mouth is essentially an eye. The eyes are essentially mouths. We've got three portals in our face which are all quite similar. The easy thing about eyes, though, is when it comes to dominant and subdominant, there is no interchange. You've always got a dominant upper eyelid, and you've always got a subdominant lower eyelid because of how that's how humans have evolved. Your upper eyelid is a protective one, so that's the one that does all the movement and comes like 80% of the way over, completely covering the pupil, the iris, and stuff, and joins with the lower eyelid, which is lazy and does about 20% of the movement and meets it. The difference comes from the shapes, and I've got two quite nice examples of shapes here. And it's why good lighting and good reference is incredibly important. Not just looking at everything from the front or from the side. Try and find as many different angles as you can. So I've got my two subjects here, and like I said, they're very, very different. So in class we were talking about concave and convex shapes. We're talking about the landmarks around the skull which are forming this. We're also talking about age, ethnicity, monolids, duolids, all this kind of jazz. So I'm going to leave all the actual construction of the eye, obviously for when we're building an eye, but what I want to do here is just talk about the shape of the eye, what's going on, things we need to think about. So the actual eye itself. So I'll use Mr. Man here because he's a bit more obvious. Upper lid dominant, lower lid subdominant, easy. So if we go from the tear duct here, I'll come out, over and dip. You can see that's the upper eyelid, dead easy. I'm not doing any curves, I'm just keeping nice straight lines as well, keeping it nice and graphic. So you can see there I'm tracing that eyelid all the way to where it just basically turns into wrinkles. If I trace the lower eyelid, you can see it comes underneath, and so you can see that dominance and subdominance and dominance. Here, this subject, because of the makeup and because of the natural shape of her eyes, it's a bit harder, but again, you will have dominant and subdominant. I think it's around there. So her scleria, or the outside of her eye, doesn't hang over as much, at least in these images that I can see, because obviously there's a bit of shadow going on. But you can see you always have dominant and upper dominant. Dominant, subdominant. Upper is dominant, lower is subdominant. And when it comes to sculpting the eye, lids, I don't sculpt the lower eyelid until I've got a decent upper eyelid, personally. Now, one thing I want people to avoid, and I've spoken about this in class, but it's getting this shape in. So there's no overhanging shape. Again, we looked at Pam. She was a bit different. Was it Pam? One of the subjects we looked at in class had kind of like something like this going on, where both, like the corner of the eye here, basically turned into one big kind of curve shape. I still want us to think about a dominant and a subdominant shape, so force it in at first, like I did with the mouth video. I overdo it at first a little bit to then knock it back later on. There's no point trying to chase perfection until you've actually got a shape in there to perfect. So think about that dominant, subdominant, and I always do the upper eyelid first. Another thing to think about quite early on, and this is really good, as soon as you start getting the eyeball in there, this will start to make a bit more sense, and then when you start getting the eyelid in there, it'll start to make more sense, is the concave and the convexness of a person's head. So I'll do this in blue. So Mr. Man here is quite a good example of a very heavy convex internal shape here of his eyes. So this is nose here, which is a glabella. And you can see right there's a lot of shadow. So if I actually draw the shape up, so I'm seeing like all this is shadow on the inside. This is all being pushed in. So I would go in there with this clay buildup and just take chunks out. This is quite a heavy. Boom, boom, boom. That's quite a convex shape. And then it starts to become concave, not convex. I think I said convex a second ago. Concave because it goes inwards, and it starts to become convex as it goes out to the outside there. But what's funny about this, not funny, but what's interesting about this one though, it's not a super smooth convex shape. If you really look at it, I'm going to draw a line to denote this. So there's like a sharp line here. So it comes down, then it goes in. Comes down, then it goes in. comes down, then it goes in, comes down, then it goes in, then it comes down. So that's the skull shape right there. That's the skull shape in the top of his eyelid. Now on our other subject, it's not quite as obvious unless you know what you're looking at, because I can see a little bit of a highlight here, and then just underneath it there's a little bit of a weird shadow here. So that's telling me that that is where the eye socket is, and she's actually got quite high eyebrows in the corners anyway. So yeah, on this guy, he's got quite a deep inset there, so that's me chiseling it out. And our other subject here, quite shallow. There's not as much shadow here. And it's also not as, like on this nose, you can see a very clear geometric shape to his nose. Not so much on this subject, a lot smoother, a lot wider, a lot more blended into the face. You know, we don't have the laugh lines, the obvious shapes that we have here. It's a lot more blended in, so I can't really see an obvious separation between that under eyelid flesh and the cheek flesh. I can't really see the clear definition of the cheekbone, of the nasolabial fold, the laugh line. It's there. It's just not very obvious. But as long as you know it's there, then it's, you know, it's easy for you to kind of see it and use it. So what we've got here, so yeah, the glabella, much bigger and shallower, but then it goes in a lot shallower. So I'm going to draw in that, what I think is the eye socket there. So yeah, very shallow concaveness. Then it straightens out and becomes slightly more convex here, as it's kind of, the eyeball underneath is forcing the shape, and then it kind of flattens out there. Okay, some shape there to think about. You know, I always like to think about stuff as wireframes in my head. I think it obviously comes from being an old school modeler. This is what kind of sticks in my head. We've got two epicanthic folds as well. Let's see this. Where's my brush? There you go. Poop. There you go. We've got two of these going on. So fold, and then fold. Two different shapes. Obviously, it's also being dictated by the eye shape. This subject here has quite a high eye, so it means that if we draw a center line across her eye kind of slants upwards like this. So she's got more of this kind of shape eye. Whereas the other subject, very, very straight eye, very straight across. So here you've got line and then line like that, and then your epicanthic fold basically shapes it across the same kind of shape. Here you've got we've got an age thing going on here, so this is obviously an older person. Obviously very different ethnicity. It could be completely different parts of the country, completely different parts of the world, whatever. So you got, it's smaller. It's not quite as big as this subject. This is quite a big epicanthic fold, the distance anyway. Here it's tiny. So yeah, you got your eyelid there, and then you get your epicanthic fold. Now this one, I love this on people. This kind of blends in as it gets to the edge there. It almost becomes the eyelid itself. You know, it overtakes and almost like overhangs, so the eyelid almost disappears underneath it. Very similar to how monolids work. All the information is still there. It's just the way the flesh has grown and, you know, developed. And then on the under eye, we've got very, very similar, very, very simple stuff. It's not as hard, this one. You've just got a nice thick fleshy bit of eyelid, and then it comes down. Now this is where the skull shape, I can clearly see this dude's skull, because I can see that line going across and up like that, and then into his skull. So that's his eye socket. And I can see how obviously the eyeball in the head is then forcing a bit of a convex shape there to then turn into a flatter shape there. Because the eyeball is a dominant shape. It's what shapes the eyelids itself. Same thing's going on here. So you've got, I'm going to kind of, I think it's like that. I think her eye socket's like that. You've obviously got the eyeball in here. And then you got nice big thicky bit of flesh. and then we've got very, very similar shapes. The lower eyelid, unless you're like Danny Trejo and you've got them cool kind of big eye bag kind of things, everyone's eyes are very, very similar. Age plays a big thing, obviously, with being able to see the skull. While I'm dealing with this area as well, I'm not just thinking about the internal part of the eye here, where the eye socket and the eyelids are. I'm also going to think about the outside area. So, new color. So obviously we got flesh in here, and we've got to think about the way that flesh from different angles shapes the head. So this is why, again, always looking at this cool 360 3/4 view is important. I'll do this, and I'll do this. So obviously, our original sculpt might have an eye socket indentation like this because we were very drastic with it, very kind of forceful with it, and that's cool. As I'm building up my eye, what I'm also going to do is start thinking about what I was talking about before, about those shapes, those angles. And then I'm also thinking about building up this area here, because I'm looking at the reference is going to help me a lot as well, because I can look at my sculpture and I can look at this and go, well, my head kind of just does this. I've not got this lovely bit of flesh that comes out there, which is the top of the eye socket there. I've not got that. So what I can do is start sculpting that bit out there. And what I'm doing there is literally how the strokes I would be doing, which I then see this start to build up. And then I think, okay, cool, but it does come in a little bit here, so then I'm going to go in there with the clay build up again and just kind of like start pushing this in. So I'll make this yellow instead. Start pushing this in. No, pushing that in. Same here. Just like I did with the corners of the mouth here. So, you can see how the eyes and the mouth are very, very similar. This is the corner of the mouth here. I'm pushing it in. I'm not just keeping it really round, so I'm pushing that in right there. Just pushing it in. And making sure that this is, maybe pull this out a little bit more. So you can see how once I've got the eyelids starting to get in there, and maybe I've Dynameshed once. I wouldn't Dynamesh all the time when I'm doing this, because then I'll just lose the eye altogether. I start to get that shape. I start to get the shapes appearing. Same jazz here. So again, I'm sculpting away. Maybe my head is, so I'm missing a little bit of that shape there. So then what I do is just start kind of building up, keeping an eye as I'm sculpting here, keeping an eye what's going on here. I'm just kind of building up. And then I can think, okay, well, it does come down a little bit there, but it comes in here, so maybe I start to just alt and push that in a little bit. Maybe here, same thing, maybe not too much, but pushing that a little bit, not too much, because this subject has far smoother, softer features than our other subject. Build that a little bit more. Maybe build that. Yeah, definitely build out the eyelid. So you can see how I'm thinking about building up these elements. Because it's all just the skull underneath is informing all this information. Looking at my subject, it's going to inform that information. I've just got to punch the mic out. Just got to not punch the mic. I've just got to think very, very simply at first. So I've been talking a lot about the shapes and looking at the soft forms. But number one, what I got to do is, boom, think about those very, very simple shapes. We know that the head is approximately 5 eyes wide. We know that approximately, if you bring the eye forward and it aligns, the front of the eye aligns to the cheekbone, that's approximately the depth of the eye. What I did see a lot of people do, and I will do a bit of drawing to the side on this one, is two things. Remember to bring the neck halfway to the halfway point between the jaw and the chin. That's where the neck goes into, just as a reminder. So when we've got our eyes there, you think about where the eye socket comes in like that, and then the eyelids come down. Bit closer to that, yeah. And the eyelids come down like that. What we need to think about is pulling them back further and almost exposing the halfway point of the eyeball here. That's the, looking from the side, if that's a halfway point of the eyeball there, we need to pull the outside of the eye back to around about that area. What I was seeing a lot of on Tuesday was you had the eye socket, all that kind of stuff, but then you had like that. underneath what would be happening is, if we're looking from underneath, that's your eyeball. You're making the eye slits, the actual eye holes, too small. And what's happening is, instead of having this nice curved angle from side to side like that, gives you a nice angle. What's happening is you're only using that area there, which is a far shallower angle. You're not bringing the eye sockets back far enough. So if we were to pull it further back, you'd see more of that eye. We shouldn't see the tear duct if we're looking from the side like this, because the tear duct should be, if we're looking from that direction, that's the corner of the eye. The tear duct should be here, obscured by the eyeball itself, the spherical eyeball. Again, once you've got that in position and you've lined it up to the cheekbone and stuff, you can move it forward and back depending on what you want to do. You know, depending on your subject, you might have a very recessed eye with big cheeks. You know, maybe once you put the eye in, that makes complete sense. Your cheeks are actually too far forward because your eye's helping you fill in the gaps. And then you go, okay, cool, I'm going to push the eye back and push the cheekbone back. Mad Mikkelsen, great example of this. And I also really saw this, and it was getting a bit annoying near the end. So you got your eye. You brought your eyeball in there. And we're looking from the front. What I was seeing was eyes like this. You're sculpting in tiny information. And the corners of the eyes would just end up being like, there's no dominance there. Just end up being like these little almond shapes. Your eyes, yeah, your eyelids, though they do cover a lot of the eyelid itself, or the eyeball itself. If you think about your tear duct here, and the outside of the eye here, think about that. I'm looking from the front here, so that's my eyeball. You know, if I only have my tear duct there and my corner of my eye there and make a really, really small like that, it just makes no sense. And that's what I was seeing a lot of. And I think that comes from you're searching for the shapes. You're not observing the shapes enough, and you're almost like searching for it, and you keep building up, you keep building up, you keep building up, until you will eventually find it. But what happens is you just make the eye really small. Think about the corner. So if we're looking from the eye from the front, the very edge here is where the tear duct is going to be. The very edge here is where the corner of the eye is going to be. You can always adjust it later on if it's too much or not enough. But, you know, that's kind of the amount that we want to see. We're almost seeing, from the front, we're almost seeing 50% of the eye. And obviously, from the side, that's our eyelid there, upper eyelid, lower eyelid. What I was saying before is we were getting a lot of that. So there wasn't enough curve there. You know, we're not exposing enough the eyeball. Think about, again, at the beginning, while you're just getting the eyeball in there, the middle point from the side of the eye there, so that's our eyeball, our iris. The middle point of the eye there, try bringing that stuff back. You might be overexposing the eyeball, but at least you're not making a very, very small eye. And if I'm being really pedantic about something, what I would like people to think about, but if you forget to do this, it's no bother, is, again, it's this dominance, subdominance thing. It's the position of the upper and lower eyelid relative to each other in these vertical lines. Because you've got to imagine that the upper eyelid is going to come down and overlap the lower eyelid. So if your eye was open, the upper eyelid there is slightly forward of the lower eyelid. That's really annoyingly small detail stuff. If I tell you about that, it means that you're actually sculpting very well, and I have to find things to really nitpick at, because then you're at a point that I can find those things to nitpick at. So yeah, really watch out for your eyes like that. Your eyes are important, you know, on characters. You want to expose those eyes. So especially if you're doing like a child character or a younger character, they tend to have big eyes. Even if you do an old character or an evil character, unless you're doing like a blind monk or something, they're still going to have to see their eyes, and you still have to have eyes exposed. It's about just understanding character design, a lot of it. You know, if you're doing like Baron Harkonnen, with his big fat head and his big fat nose, and yeah, he has got little eyes, but that's because like he's got maybe these kind of like Small, beady, evil man eyes. It's not to say that he's still got big eyes there and he's just got small eyes. It's just because his head's big and they're the size of his eyes. As simple as, you know. So, head is approximately 5 eyes wide. Number one. And then we've got to build stuff up. So, we are 20 minutes in, so quite a lot of waffle there. But hopefully this starts to make a bit more sense. So let's actually jump in and actually do some stuff. So, into here. So obviously, I've done this after I've done the mouth. And what I'm going to do is actually save this, because I quite like it. Head one. I'm going to knock it back away. Because obviously we're at 512 resolution. I don't do that. I don't want to do the next bit with that. So now we're back at 128. I'm going to smooth back. I'm going to smooth it all. I'm going to push back. I should not be smoothing. I'm going to push back my eyes to some kind of form. And I'm going to have it maybe how some of you have got it. So maybe you've added a bit more information into your eye sockets. Maybe you've not, whatever. I'm kind of going to make drastic eyes for what I kind of saw a lot of you lot. I'm going to make kind of bad eyes. And show you how easy it is to get yourself out of this information. Oh, V. So everyone's kind of still doing very big eyes like that. Okay. So we're at this stage where we've got eye sockets, we've got nose eyes, so now we're making eyes. We need to first bring in our eyes. So how do we do that? Very, very simple. Eyes, spheres are a subtool. Subtools are the meshes of ZBrush. So if I'm dealing with subtools, I'm going to have to come to the subtool menu, which is here. Top to top. Now in here, all I'm going to do is come down to the middle of the menu where it says insert or append. At this stage, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to just append, for instance. 3D sphere, because eyes are spheres. Put it in. Boom. So it comes in nice and big. Don't worry about that for now. Grab the new sphere subtool, or hold Alt and click it. When you hold Alt and you click a subtool, it'll quickly switch to it. And you'll know you got it selected because it's the brighter one. So what I'm going to do is press W to get my movement tool up. I'm going to press duplicate. And then I'm going to move it across. And then I'm going to press duplicate again. I'm going to move it across. Doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. Again, these are approximations. I'm probably going to move these around later on anyway. So now what I've done is I've got the center of the eye and I've got the left portion of the eye. Now what I'm going to do is make the right portion of the eye. So I've got the 5 eyes wide. Well, while I've got this outer sphere selected, I'm going to come down to, I'm going to close subtool. I'm going to come one down and go to geometry. Modify topology, which is at the bottom. Mirror and weld. So what mirror and weld will do is we'll duplicate, mirror it to the other side, and weld it to the same subtool, all in one go. So there you go. So these two are now in the same subtool. I'm going to hold Alt. I'm going to hold Alt and click on the other eye, this one. Do the same thing, mirror and weld. There we go. So now I've got my 5 eyes wide. Last thing to do is actually bring these into one subtool. So I'm going to grab that center eye there. I'm going to come down to merge, and then I'm going to merge down. And it's going to say this is a non-undoable function. Because what essentially happens is it'll merge my upper eyelid down to my lower eyelid, basically deleting that second subtool, deleting this subtool here. And it'll completely forget about it. If I was to then Control Z back, the other two seem to disappear. And that's because the one step back from this, there was only this object in the subtool. Luckily, we've got history here. We can just... So that's why it's saying this is a non-undoable function. It is technically undoable, but you'll get rid of the information. And then I'm going to merge this one down as well. Nice. Now everything's together. My control should be in the middle. All I'm going to do is move my block of stuff forward a little bit. And then I'm going to start to scale it. And I can turn on or off symmetry. It's not symmetry, sorry, perspective. So this is orthographic. This is perspective. I'm going to turn on it orthographic just because for poops and gigs. And all I'm going to do now is just scale it down from the center and get an approximate. So I'm not worried about making this perfect or anything like that. What I'm really doing here is I'm looking for these two subtools. This one and this one. So this one and this one. I'm looking at these two subtools and looking to see if they're pretty much where I should be. And I'm also looking from the side. I'm bringing it backwards, bringing it down, bringing it backwards. I'm trying to get into that position. It's not going to look right as well straight away, but you know, whatever. So I'm going to just... That looks about okay. So it's maybe there. That looks okay. It's a little bit smaller, but I think my head is generally a bit bigger. So if you're doing a younger character, then this is going to fit. Actually, no, with some younger characters, you can almost have like 4 eyes wide and have it in the middle. It's a bit weird with kids because they grow differently. Cool. So I've got my eyes there, and I'm also going to pull them back. And this is what I'm doing here is getting my first initial position from the horizontal position in position. There's a lot of positions just then. I'm getting my eyeballs in a position where they look correct from the side. It don't matter if they get weird shapes like this because I've not done any eye socket stuff yet. Cool. Now what I'm going to do is split these apart. So I'm going to get rid of the ones I don't want and then keep the ones and merge them together that I do want. So what I'm going to do is come down to split. So again, we're dealing with subtool, so I'm in the subtool menu. Split, which is above merge. Split parts. If you click split similar parts, nothing's going to happen. Because what split similar parts does is it looks at the object, and if they're the same kind of shape, so if they're a little bit spherical, it'll keep them together in one subtool. So obviously these are all perfect spheres. Now it's going to happen. But if I click parts, split 2 parts, it'll say this is an undoable function. Yes. There we go. So now we've got new subtools. 5 new subtools. And all I'm going to go through is select a subtool, and if I can't see it, or if it doesn't go, if it's not one of these in the middle here, I'm going to delete it. So I can't see any of these getting brighter. That's because it's probably this one in the middle. So I'm going to delete it. That one, now on the far right, definitely I don't want that one, so I'm going to delete it. Then I got that one on the far left. I definitely don't want that one, so I'm going to delete it. Dead easy. And now I'm just going to merge this eye down onto the other eye to make them, you know, a solid group. So merge down, correct. So now it's one group. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press X for symmetry. So I'm going to get symmetry turned on. That's because subtools, unless you generate a new object from like the lightbox, you make a new sphere or something. New subtools will not have symmetry turned on by default. It's a bit schleppy, it's a bit horrible. It catches me out every now and then because I forget about it. But yeah, as soon as you've merged these two together, press X to turn on symmetry. Why we're going through all those different menus is the same reason why we did this kind of similar back and forth from menus in Maya. I'm not trying to confuse you. I'm not trying to make your life harder. I'm also not trying to be a bully. What I'm doing is getting you moving from different menus, so you get used to moving through the menus and get used to positions. Like if I need to go back, you'll always be using modify topology. You'll always be using split and merge. You'll always be using append and insert. So if you know where those are, awesome. I will say though, there is a much easier way of doing what I've just done that we will look at later on. Because if I show you it now, it's one of those things that if I show you it, you'll subconsciously do it, and then you'll end up making loads of mess, and it'll be difficult for you. But there is a much quicker way of doing that, but which we'll look at later on. So there are my eyes. And like I said, they're okay. I might just nudge them around even at this early stage. So I'm going to bring up my movement tool by pressing W. And then I'm going to hold Alt. And what Alt does, if you look here, it unlocks this. So this is like holding D in Maya. So if I just, without holding Alt, if I just move this, it's going to move the objects, even though symmetry is turned on. If I hold Alt, I can move it over the top of one of the eyes, or holding Alt, I can click this little Google pin, and it'll drop her over this eye. Basically, it drops it in the middle of this eye. So it's perfectly in the middle now. And what I can do is move it side to side. I can move it closer to the middle. I can do whatever I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to nudge this like that. Tiny nudges. Awesome. Now, before I start making the eyelids as well, what I'm going to do is look at this. He looks quite scared. He's got bright eyes going on, so I need to pull down my eyebrows a little bit. You know, it's also very rounded. This is very, very rounded, so I'm going to just skull it out a little bit. Make it a bit more of a skull. That's a bit better. My eyes still might be a little bit too far apart, so I'm just going to nudge them in a little bit more. Like that. There you go. Okay. And then I'm going to look at the surrounding area. So we were talking about those convex and concave shapes within the eye. The red meaning where I'm adding mass to make it convex. The yellow meaning where I'm going to chisel in to make it concave. So I'm going to start thinking about that, even at this early stage. So clay build-up, bang bang, BCB. Number one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to overdo. Oops, a daisy. Let's bring that forward a bit more. There we go. Make sure I'm on the right subtool. I'm going to just overdo this a bit. I'm going to bring that quite far in. Okay. I think my eyes can probably come back a little bit as well. Nudge them back. There, at that point, because I'm always adding something then checking, checking. Does it look right? Looking for all the different angles. When I did that, then I can clearly see that I'm not seeing enough of that corner of the eye. So I'm going to get my move brush. I'm just going to pull it backwards a little bit. You know, you can see there that that's very shallow. This C shape. But if I pull it back, it's a bit more pronounced. It's a bit more of a proper shape. Okay. So now I'm going to make my eyelids. And that's as simple as clay build-up or any kind of mask-making brush. You can use the standard brush if you want to. I hate that brush. But what I'm going to do is just start literally sculpting out of the head. I'm not going to use any new separate shapes or anything like that. I'm just going to start pulling this information out slowly and carefully. But yet still freely and with no fear. I'm being carefully fearless. Because I know it's going to look like shit for a bit, so I don't care. You know, it's okay if it looks rubbish. Okay. I think that's pretty good, actually. Not bad for a beginning stage. It's going to have this really weird indentation here because we've literally just pulled a small section out. And then I can, once I've got at least something I can play with out, I can then go in there with the move brush and think about those simple shapes I was talking about. So instead of chasing the smooth eye at first, which I think is what's forcing us to make, you know, when I was saying about making the tiny eyes. Like this, when we were talking up here and we were talking about how some of you have made the eyes really, really small, but the eyeball's still big and we're only seeing a tiny, tiny portion. I think it's because you're trying to chase the very, very smooth angle without just thinking, right, you know what, I'm just going to go shape 1, shape 2, shape 3. Just make it graphical. You've not got the information there to make it sharp. Make it graphical. Okay. Look underneath. That's important. Also look underneath. Does it look like it's shaping across the eye properly? I can see here I've got a bit of a lump. So I'm just going to push that back. Maybe pull this far forward a little bit. There we go. It will still look a little bit buggy at this point. And maybe it might seem to be a little bit lower in the head. It should be because we're making shadows where we don't want them. But for now, that's okay. If I do need to move anything later on, I can do that. It's no problem. I'm just going to push this lower section back a little bit. Because now that I've got these in there, I think I've got too... Oops, it is smooth. I think I've got too much information there, so I'm just going to push that back a little bit. Okay. Okay. And then looking back at my reference, again, looking at what we've got here, especially this keys. Again, I pushed in that shape there. So what I might try and do at this stage, very carefully, is try and just bring out some of this flatter information where I've currently got this horrible shape going on in here. I might start pulling that out a little bit. And again, I'm going to do it in 3/4 so I can kind of keep an eye on what's going on. So pull that out. Okay, that's nice. Yeah. Stuck on a cape, it could probably come out a little bit more. Do I need to lower my lids a little bit, my eyebrows a little bit more? Do I need to pull those down a little bit? Okay. Look back. So now I actually think I've lowered mine too much. So what I'm going to do is make a drastic move. Big old move brush. Move everything up a little bit. Then grab my eyes. Move them up a little bit. Much better. That actually wasn't intentional. I think because I forced my eyes to be kind of big, doughy, round eyes at first. Before I brought my skull in there, I think by pulling them down, I've kind of moved everything down, so my eyes were more like down here at one point when they should be up here. So that, just by moving up like a centimetre and a half, I had no fear of doing that then. I just grabbed them and moved them. And again, just thinking about those fat deposits. I've not Dynameshed as well. Look how crunchy some of this information is. Okay, it's looking okay. I'll draw it on the board when I'm in tomorrow, if you poke me and remind me. But there's a really nice way of looking at how the planes of the eye here can form. It really helped me. It's almost like someone's got a ribbon and they've twisted it both like against each other, so you got a bit of a knot in it. When I saw this diagram, I was like, oh my god, that's absolutely how that kind of shape works. It is a twist. It worked for me. There we go. So I'm not building up too much. Again, I'm not bringing it out like this. I'm not making any kind of shapes. If I see anything like that, I'm going to say to you, does that look right? And if you say yes, we're going to have issues. But I'm just being, again, that carefully free. You know, I'm not worrying about adding detail. I'm just not going in heavy with a heavy hand. Or like with a really intense brush. I'm being a bit more kind of reserved about it. But so far, that's looking nice. You know, I've worried about the position, so I've changed it a little bit. I brought in those eyes, but then I did alter them a little bit. I've not altered the scale. I just kind of pushed them in a couple of times, because with this head, it looks a bit better. I've had that turned off. I've had it in orthographic for a long time as well, which isn't a bad thing. It's just whatever. But now I'm going to work in normal perspective, just so I don't get kind of complacent. Maybe I just might switch it on and off every now and then. In fact, I'm going to switch it off for now. Okay, maybe a bit more mass underneath here. Just a little bit. And again, I don't want to give him Hulk eyes. And it's very important if you're doing someone like our other subject here. She's not got Hulk eyes. She's not got big, dominant, big wads of flesh up here. So you've really got to look at this. She's quite shallow, remember. She's not got a lot of very craggy detail. She's very, very soft. Right. And then I'm going to hit it with a little bit of a lower eyelid. So I'm just going to start to drag this bit out a little bit. Just a little bit. Just so I can expose that part of the eye. And then just use something like the Dam Standard. Just like we did with the mouth and just like we did with in here, in class, I'm going to just bring the sensitivity of that down. And just use the Alt to almost use a pinch brush. And I'm just going to start to pinch that in a little bit. Maybe a bit stronger than that. Just like that. Because again, there's not as much information on that lower eyelid unless you're someone like Danny Trejo. This is quite a subtle, soft area. So I can see there, just by doing that, I can tell that my cheekbone is too high. So I can pull that down a little bit. You know, my eye sockets are actually too small, so this lower part is too high up, so I've got to pull that down a little bit. Ooh, too big. Okay, there we go, something like that for now. So if we look from the side there, maybe we're exposing too much of the eye from the side, but it's better than nothing. It's not like I've got no eyelid. You know, like I was saying before, I did see some on Tuesday which you were seeing like that. You see no eyelid. You see no eyeball. It might be a little bit thin. Oh, the upper eyelid's definitely too thin. So I can go in there with the Dam Standard. And, you know, these are chunky bits of flesh. Eyelids are surprisingly chunky. There we go. Look from underneath, how does it look? Look from below, how does it look? Look from the sides, how does it look? This could be a bit chunkier. Have I started to lose the eye and kind of almost like start to cover the eye too much with flesh? I don't think so here. But you can just grab the move brush and just start to move stuff around. Mask off areas, you know, I think we're sleeping on... We've used the mask to mask off the ear to pull it out. Why not use it to, you know, mask off that part of the eye? So then I'm only dealing with the lower part. Or mask off this part, so I'm only dealing with the upper part. You know, use the mask for stuff. Explore. So at that point, I've not done any Dynameshing as well so far. I've just been using the native geometry, and it's... Because I was already at 128, it's not looking too bad, but I am, especially on the lower eyelid, I am starting to pull some areas, and definitely here. This is looking a little bit gnarly. So at this stage, knowing I'm going to lose some information, I'm going to bring it back in. I'm going to Dynamesh. So you can see that I had some okay information for the tear duct there, some nice information there for the outside of the eye. As I Dynameshed it, it's got destroyed, so I'm just going to pull that information back in. As much as I can, really. You know, I'm not going to lose sleep over that. But whenever you Dynamesh at low resolutions, you'll always lose a bit of sharpness. Like we saw in the mouth, when I jumped from 128 to 512, I didn't actually lose that much information when I Dynameshed during 512. I only lost a little bit of sharpness in the where the lips meet. It's far more drastic inside lower resolutions. But that's why I also have no fear, because I know that as I'm Dynameshing, I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to lose something that I've got to put back in. But then I'm not going to lose sleep over trying to get it perfect. I've just kind of got to work with it. You know. And again, this is easy for me to say because I've been doing it for so long, but at the same time I've also been teaching for a long time. You can absolutely do this, and a lot of it is just down to observation. You know, taking the time to actually look at stuff, not just looking at it superficially of like, that's a head. You know, looking at it, it's like, what are the angles of that thing? How does that shape curve into the other? Looking at all the different shadows, taking into Photoshop, start messing with the values, so lower, upper the contrast, get a threshold version, see if you can really pull out some of those nice information that the lighting is there, but it's obviously because there's mid-tones, you might be losing it. So, you know, what information can you see? Because as you start adjusting some of the contrast and values, some information will start to appear. You're like, oh, actually, you know what? That's actually really helpful. And at this point, you can look and go, what does it look like? It still looks a little bit buggy to me, so I'm going to grab this, push it back a little bit. I'm going to grab all of this, pull it back a little bit. Maybe move this up a little bit, move it down a little bit, move this down. So if I'm trying to go do my old man, he's got more like a downward swoop. He might look really sad at first. Don't worry, that's kind of like, because there's so much shadow in this, especially on this material, because the shadows are quite intense, we're gonna see downward sad eyes. You know, if you change it to something like a wax or something like this, it doesn't look as sad because we're losing those darker shadows. And then when you start dealing with actual real world lighting, real world skin, all that kind of stuff, you lose even more information, because then the shadows are being blended in through skin porosity and different lights. All incredibly interesting. But don't worry about it, because it's just a little bit of movement, and now he's not sad anymore. Now he's stern. And then obviously you can go in there and start to take away, build up, and maybe, you know, yeah, now that I've got my eyes in there, my cheeks are really too big. Push back the cheeks a little bit. I'm not talking pushing them out like that. I'm talking confident like strokes. No fear. So build up a bit there, but then push it back there. That's a bit better. Maybe push back a little bit. And this is where I'm working. I said it in the last video. I said it in every video. I work with this noise very, very well. There's sculpting noise, and then there's like the Dynamesh noise. So when I've Dynamesh stuff, it softens it out, and some of the information gets a bit blobby. But when I'm sculpting it, some of that information becomes sharper. So as I'm pushing back the cheeks there, I'm getting sculpting noise. But then areas like here, because it's like soft information, that's like Dynamesh noise, and it gets a little bit difficult to look at, so I can just kind of go in there and... At least that's how I look at it. Again, I've been doing this for a very long time, and everyone's different. Everyone perceives things differently. You know, brains, there's no two brains that are the same. Even twins, you know, you'll have different brains, obviously. Now, with this resolution, again, you're not able to add the information that you might want to add in there. You're only able to add in big information. So things like those very, very small epicanthic folds. You just... Ooh, oh, my Photoshop student's thing again. I can't seem to fix it. I don't know why it's doing it. So that's why we've got these thin epicanthic folds, these thin lids, or these thin like folds here. You can't get that in at 128. You struggle to get it in as 512. That's like up their resolution. Sometimes I even wait until after I've retopologized it to knock these things in. You know, depends on what my topology is like. So don't bother doing that kind of stuff. What you could do is you could sculpt to a point, make it neat-ish. I'm still talking neat as in using this kind of craggy information. You know, I could do a screen, like do a cap, like do bang, and then basically like that. And then I could take it into Photoshop and maybe using the values off this, paint in those epicanthic folds, because then maybe I'm thinking, okay, going forward, is everything okay? You know, instead of waiting for using sculpting detail to answer your problems, to see if anything's off, maybe take it into Photoshop or whatever, Procreate, don't care. And then going like, okay, I'm going to use the value, I'm going to pick this value for a shadow, I'm going to add that in, I'm going to pick this value for a highlight, I'm going to add that in. Now that I've added that in, I can see that, yeah, things are a little bit too heavy up top, maybe your eyes are too far low, down, all that kind of jazz. Again, a lot of this stuff isn't hard to do technically, because what have I done there? All I've done is just use the Clay buildup to drag out that information. The hard part is the control of the shape. It's looking past what we think we know and actually look at what we know we know. You know, look at the shape of the eyes. There are no one shape of eye which everyone has as well. There are billions of different shapes of eyes in the world. What makes an eye sad? What makes an eye angry? If you were to have a heavily shrouded upper lid, so if I was to change our subject into like a very heavy monolid, or what do you call it, a super monolid. So that I wouldn't have as much deep crevice information here. I'd pull some of that out. I'd, you know, maybe because if this person has got a super monolid, they've probably come from a race of people or a type of person who doesn't have super sharp skull definition, so I can soften some of this up maybe. You know, give it less of a glabella. Soften this out a little bit more. I mean, that's already looking much, much better. And all I'm doing here is, you can't see it, is I'm just switching in between. If you look in the middle of my brush, you might be able to see it. I'm just literally tapping Alt, and well, holding it at the same time, but I'm going in between Alt and adding and taking away using Alt to basically control that. So, you know, so, although, you know, this is a bit too, you know, bring this out. We looked at Pam, and she had that beautiful, around the tear duct, that beautiful fold of skin which covers all that area, you know. And she was very, like our subject in Photoshop, which I'm not going to go into because it's freaking out. She hasn't got, at the top of the glabella there, she hasn't got much sharp detail, you know. There's no super definite nose up there, so again, that's softened out a lot more. Soften, 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 soften. And that's looking more towards someone like that. But again, I've only just been doing that for a couple of minutes, and it's still nowhere near as it should be. The nose is wrong, the mouth is wrong, the head shape is generally wrong. But you can take whatever you want, and take it wherever you want. There you go. So yeah, eyes, not hard to do from a functional point of view. It's hard for a technical point of view. It's hard as a thing to look at, to understand. And it's all about positioning. And eyes, again, psychologically, we look at eyes so much on all these different characters, from hyper realistic stuff like Last of Us, all the way through Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, some of the crappy gacha games like Genshin Impact and Honkai, all that kind of stuff. The character eyes are what we look at. There's only a few characters that don't have eyes, and to be honest, they're going into the realm of creature. So you've got, obviously, Xenomorph, it's a creature. You've got some stuff from like Hellblade and mythological people that I would say are going into the realm of creatures. But then if you think of really, really well-known characters, everyone's got eyes for the most part. Eyes take a bit of time to do. Like I said, they're one of my weakest points. I tend to spend a lot of time to nail eyes. Getting them in like this, I'm okay with. But to get eyes really, really good, I do spend quite a lot of time on them, because I just struggle with eyes sometimes. If I don't get it, I get frustrated, and I have to have a paddy. But again, it's all about practice and stuff. I'm going to do another video, I think after tomorrow, maybe on Friday, which is going to be things you can do to practice in ZBrush, in Procreate, not Procreate, sorry, in ZBrush, in Nomad, in Blender, that don't need a full sculpt. Basically, it's like a practice cube or a practice orb or something like that. Basically, you get something, you practice on it in specific areas. But I'll probably do a video like that on Friday. Not yet, because I've already done 2 tonight. So yeah, eyes. Simple, yet hard. It's simple technically, because all you're doing is building up the surface and then shaping it. It's hard because it's hard to nail the shape. And it's also, I guess, there's one bit of this which is a bit technically hard, and that's actually bringing in the eyes and getting them in position. That's many, many steps involved. But, with a bit of practice, you'll get them in really, really easy. I guess practice. That's all it is, practice. Right. See you in the next one.